Thank you for joining us. My name is Heiji Kwan, and I'm a research analyst at the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy, and we are very excited to have you all with us. For those of you who are new to the Lincoln Institute, we're a private operating foundation founded 75 years ago with the idea that key responses to the great challenges we face in our time, such as inequality and climate change, can be found in the use, valuation, and taxation of land. Our focus on land has brought us to legacy cities where an excess of land can be a source of many problems, but it can also be a huge opportunity. These are cities in the US that have lost substantial numbers of residents since their peaks and currently suffer poverty rates higher than the national rate. As we learned more about these places, we focused our efforts more on small mid-sized cities, which suffer all the challenges of their larger peers, but have much lower capacity to address them and often fall through the cracks in the national discourse. Because Lincoln was so uniquely poised at the intersection of land use, municipal fiscal health, and other topics relevant to legacy cities, we launched the Legacy Cities Initiative in 2020 with the goal of providing legacy city leaders and practitioners with, first, cutting-edge research on revitalization strategies that work in their kinds of places and which put equity, well-being, and climate resilience front and center. Second, tools and educational opportunities like this one, which are designed to share good practices and help bridge research and implementation. And third, networks and peer learning opportunities, like our Legacy Cities Communities of Practice, which works with teams of city and nonprofit leaders from Buffalo, New York, St. Louis, Missouri, Reading, Pennsylvania, and Toa Baja, Puerto Rico, to help them focus revitalization efforts on the needs of an underserved neighborhood in their communities. If you'd like to learn more about our Legacy Cities Initiative or stay informed of our activities, please sign up for our newsletter at the link in the chat or visit our website at legacycities.org. As I've already mentioned, we're particularly concerned with helping leaders revitalize their places in ways that center equity and climate resilience, and ensure that the existing residents of their places are the ones who benefit as the places improve. But you ask any legacy city leader what their city needs more than anything else, and they'll say economic development, specifically new jobs and new businesses. So we partnered with the Urban Manufacturing Alliance to explore how to build on the industrial heritage of many legacy cities while also building economies that are more equitable and climate resilient. That collaboration resulted in a working paper, Community Resilience Through Small-Scale Manufacturing, which features the stories of 3 places that are trying to do just that. And you can find the link in the chat. Thank you to the Urban Manufacturing Alliance and the practitioners that are here today to share their stories. Before I hand things off, I wanted to share a few housekeeping notes. Please keep your cameras off and stay muted. And if you have questions, please put them in the chat. Now I'd like to hand it off to Audra Ladd, co-director of the Urban Manufacturing Alliance.
Thank you so much, and welcome everyone to this webinar. We are very excited to be here talking about legacy cities, smaller legacy cities, and I just want to thank all the panelists. I'm really excited that you get to hear from them today. Again, if you hadn't had a chance to read the paper, it is in the chat. You can read it afterward, and I want to just take a moment to talk about why UMA is partnering on this project. For those of you who haven't heard of the Urban Manufacturing Alliance, we're a nonprofit. We're a national network of organizations that believe manufacturing is a strategy for economic mobility. And our collective goal is for cities and towns to continue to be places where we make things and to create inclusive pathways to middle-class jobs, spark homegrown innovation, and lead to greater economic prosperity in communities. And this is what this webinar is really about, is sharing some of these really inspirational tools that are coming up in legacy cities across the country and hoping for others to replicate them. So I'm just going to take a couple minutes to share some highlights from the working paper, just in case you haven't had a chance to read it. Really, for the framing, so smaller legacy cities share a history of industrial dominance and loss, as well as common assets around industrial land, worker knowledge, and natural resources. These places are as mentioned before, typically declining in population, but not always. And that decline in population was due to industry moving away, manufacturing industry in particular, in the 70s, 80s, and even the 90s. So this paper that we wrote collectively really uplifts how small-scale manufacturing can be a strategy now for positive change, overcoming the harm of the past and imagining manufacturing to support local economic growth and mobility, environmental sustainability, and racial equity. So I'm so excited that we have the leaders from 3 cities highlighted in the paper with us today: Akron, Ohio, Duluth, Minnesota, and New Bedford, Massachusetts, who will share their unique perspectives on what is happening in the places that are near and dear to them. I want to maximize the time that you hear from these panelists. So just some themes that you'll hear running through a lot of what we're going to be sharing. Themes around accessible entrepreneurship, particularly in Akron. Brownfield redevelopment, which I feel like is a focus area that a lot of cities are looking at right now. Duluth will likely talk about that. Leveraging port infrastructure. Our trade and our ports are so important right now for manufacturing, trade, and supply chain resilience. And so we'll hear from New Bedford on that. And then regional specialties around New Bedford and Akron. Just really interesting ways that they're doing cluster development and an economic framework that actually leads to economic equity and economic mobility. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to Sarah to moderate the panel, and hope you all enjoy. Please put your questions in the chat. We're going to have plenty of time for questions. So thank you. It's over to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Audra. Really excited to bring to you 3 experts on small scale manufacturing in smaller legacy cities today. And I will just ask them to start off by introducing themselves and answering the question of why small scale manufacturing is important to their city's economic development, and what kinds of making and manufacturing businesses are they seeing flourish right now. So this is your chance to make the case and make the pitch to all the practitioners on the call. So let's start with Misty Beasley. Misty Beasley is the regional director of the MBAC program at Akron Urban League, and she is based in Akron, Ohio. Misty?
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. As you said, my name is Misty Beasley, and I am the regional director for the Minority Business Assistance Center, which is hosted by the Akron Urban League. I just want to let you guys know that there are 7 minority business assistance centers across the state of Ohio. So we are a state funded program, and manufacturing is important to our area because small and middle-sized manufacturing companies are critical to Ohio region because they represent 90% of the job growth for high-paying jobs. Ohio has been known for manufacturing in several things like metalworking, steel production, rubber, plastic, food. And Summit County has a strong history in manufacturing, and our location makes us a perfect place for those distribution and logistics companies. Manufacturing has been the heart and soul of our community for many years, and it has positioned the greater Akron area and Northeast Ohio as a competitive regional economy and global player. For our small and medium-sized manufacturing companies, it helps to create new opportunities. And those opportunities lead to the creation of jobs, because we know with one manufacturing company, one manufacturing job being created, there are at least 3 to 4 different jobs to support that. And that generates wealth in our economy. And so manufacturing is one of our key industries that helps to provide economic stability. It drives our business growth, and it secures jobs and talents in our area, in our region. And particularly for the Akron area, we have seen a lot of food manufacturers, those in the plastic industry, arise in the last few years.
Thanks, Misty. And next, I'd like to introduce Derek Santos. He's the executive director of the New Bedford Economic Development Council in New Bedford, Massachusetts. Derek?
Sarah, great. And I wanted to thank you and certainly the Lincoln Institute and UMA for putting this on. My board was quite excited about this opportunity to chat about something that we feel doesn't get discussed enough. So thank you for the opportunity. So I'm the director of the New Bedford Economic Development Council. We're a 501c3 nonprofit in New Bedford. We're set up in a way where economic development in New Bedford happens through us as the lead agency. We're not part of city government, but we work very closely with city government. The reason for that is it allows for continuity between elections. Our city council gets elected every 2 years, mayor every 4 years. And during those sort of transitions, consistency is incredibly important. The reason why we worked with Sarah on this paper when they reached out is a lot of what the UMA strategies are so closely aligned with our mission as an organization and our goals for a city. Much like many other gateway cities across the United States, we have a tradition in history in manufacturing, as was mentioned by Audra at the beginning. New Bedford is the #1 commercial fishing port in the United States. I don't if it's 17, 18, 22, some number of years running in that region. I can assure you, if you've been to a cocktail party and if you've had scallops wrapped in bacon, those scallops came from the port of New Bedford. And we have that tradition of port-based manufacturing, or fish processing, right? But that's all sort of a value-added manufacturing. New Bedford has had a huge history as well with textile manufacturing. All the Joseph Abboud suits made in the United States are made in New Bedford, and a variety of other products, including Titleist golf balls. So if you're driving them off the fairway, we love that. A huge amount of Titleist golf balls worldwide are made in New Bedford. And we see this as important to us right now in terms of what is flourishing, because there's not only all of those bases that we've seen traditionally, but if you look at in New Bedford, we see new companies, family-owned companies that were involved in supporting the fishing industry, looking to aquaculture and sustainable technologies and making the equipment and supplies that are needed. We're working with new startup companies that are looking at prototyping and manufacturing it in that way, direct to order, starting to use AI and other things and how they order and deal with that type of work. And also something that's super cool that we love is arts and culture-based manufacturers and producers of art and furniture and other goods in that way. So it's a great fit for us. We love to be a city that's known for making great things. We'll always be a port city first, but we're big believers in expanding out from that center. We think that's good for the city's economic growth and incredibly good for all the citizens and all the visitors that come. So it's a big part of our strategy.
Thanks, Eric. And I'm already hearing some recurring themes. Can I ask one question before I move on to Lars? Is it scallop, not scallop?
Scallop.
Scallop. Okay. I will not make that mistake during this call. Great. So last but not least, we have Lars Cuno from Lisk Duluth. He's the neighborhood program officer. Lars?
Great to join some great communities on today. And we are a port, much like New Bedford. We don't have that great seafood or scallops, though. And so we're deep into the Midwest. We're the end of the St. Lawrence Seaway. And we had a neighborhood adjacent to the port that was not flourishing. And so it was an opportunity for Lisk as a really, we're a broad based community development organization, national. And so we saw a neighborhood that needed some help. We stepped in, we helped create an opportunity, some energy for some small scale manufacturing in the neighborhood. Duluth is known mostly for transportation. We have an aviation sector, a medical community, and an education sector. And so, we have some flourishing, growing opportunities in the community, but we were looking to help facilitate an easier path into becoming an entrepreneur and generating some energy in the community. In this case, working in a neighborhood corridor that already had some energy from craft makers. And so we coalesced that, and away we went, and we had a great success story.
Thank you, Lars. One of the things that struck me as I was speaking to the three of you and others for this research paper is just the different contexts of all of your cities, overlapping themes for sure, but also just the unique context that each of you present. And New Bedford, yes, is a port city as well as Duluth, but such different implications for the local city economic development, right? And different implications in terms of the types of industries that are flourishing there that are related to manufacturing. Also, in addition, when we speak about manufacturing and small scale manufacturing, the three of you have defined manufacturing across the board in such different ways, from maker and craft small manufacturers who may not even identify with the term manufacturing, to more mid-sized manufacturing, more traditional folks who are working with big machines and factories, but who are modernizing their operations, scaling up, and also looking at land development and capitalization as really important keys to their expansion and continued success. So just want to set that context is that these places are all so different. Their keys to success are so different. And even the ways that they define manufacturing and they've come onto it and they value it are also so different, but so much to learn and so much richness in each of your respective cities. And I think if there's one common thread through our conversation today, it is that we are all uncovering the existing assets in place. So I'd love to start with that discussion, which is, please help me set the stage for practitioners in the room. What are the existing conditions of success that help set the stage for manufacturing in your cities? I've heard already histories of particular manufacturing specialties that have laid dormant in your respective cities, existing geographic positions, and also stakeholder assets. But I'd love to hear more about the particulars of your place. So maybe we could start with Lars and in terms of the neighborhood-based revitalization focus.
Sure. So the area that we worked on fortunately had the zoning in place that allowed for the manufacturing and a really a great mix of different business types. And so, we were able to make that work. Without the zoning, we would have had to go through a rezoning process or all of the hoops that go along with making sure that everything could work. And so we were very fortunate that that zoning was in place, and that geography, it's in the center of our community, literally. Access, it had great freeway access, so that was great. And space, we without space, it's difficult to create new and energized businesses. And so we had that, and because of the circumstances of the area, they were affordable. And one aspect of something that we considered that we thought was really important was ownership, and making sure that the entrepreneurs owned the real estate so that ultimately somewhere down the road that displacement wouldn't occur. They come in, they re-energize an area, and then they get displaced because they can't afford the rent any longer. So I think those were really some very key fundamentals for us.
And Derek, Misty, anything that kind of triggers for you or thoughts about your local conditions?
And so for us here in Akron, we have been very strategic and intentional about working with our smaller businesses, our smaller scale companies. There's a need just to bring them up for the basic business practices. And so even though they are in the manufacturing businesses, they may need other services like assistance with a professional service provider. So our ecosystem, we have collaborated and join together in partnership to make sure that we are providing the services that our businesses need to be successful and sustainable. So if it's them assisting with their financials or helping with their business plans, those types of things, we as partners in our ecosystem have begun to collaborate together to make sure that we are eliminating any gaps that an entrepreneur or a business owner may have in doing business.
Tell me a little bit more about that ecosystem, Misty, because I know from my conversations in Akron that that kind of pre-existed the more recent rise in manufacturing. What was the work that was done to thread it all together?
And so basically us developing different partnerships and sitting on different committees to see what our businesses are in need of, particularly our manufacturers, to see what help they needed in to do business. And so if it was an individual that needed a patent, making sure that they had that resource or that information so they could get that ideal patent and to put into production. And so basically it was just, a report that came out that said our minority-owned small businesses were left out of economic development or economic growth. And so in order for us to thrive, we had to come together as partners to see what we needed to do in our city to make sure that these businesses had the resources that they need to be successful.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I know there was a lot of collaboration with the county as well as the city and other intermediaries. And I'm calling now, because these conversations were a year ago, that when we first talked, I kept on asking you, why is manufacturing important to your small businesses? And you kept on reframing the conversation. Well, we were focusing on our small businesses, and out of that has come the manufacturing growth. I just want to lift that up.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. Definitely, it was an initiative that we wanted to make sure that all businesses had the resource that they needed, because some of our small businesses may not come from a family that does business, and they might not have that particular skill set that they need to be successful. And so in working with our small businesses, we seen a population of our manufacturers that also needed this help and these resources. And so we wanted to make sure that we provided a holistic approach for all industries across our city.
Great, great. Derek, I saw you came off mute there for a second.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, and we've done, I think this is one of the parts that's consistent, right, between what Lars and Misty were describing. You have to have the fundamentals in place. So zoning, land use policy, that's a must. That's because those things take a long time to get in place if you don't have them. So communities that have a tradition in manufacturing, that's usually already there. And the working in partnerships, as was mentioned at the beginning of the of the webinar, right? All the same problems, but not all the same resources. So we're always looking to work in partners, but even if you weren't, you have to do that because no one small organization has all the resources. So you have to work in partnership. Well, one of our programs specifically with entrepreneurs, we have 7 community spoke partners providing resources to the various new businesses starting up. That's key. And the last point that I wanted to mention, I think Misty also hit on this, was a lot of the programs that we know, we almost sort of take for granted this sort of manufacturing tradition in all these companies that we had, and the programs that we started for small businesses and existing businesses, or I would say retooled and accelerated with when ARPA funding became available through both state, local, and federal resources to sort of supercharge these things. They were meant for all sectors, not just manufacturing. And we were kind of surprised when we started looking at it, how much small scale manufacturing there was, how much opportunity for growth there was there. And particularly when we looked at in the artist community, this is a prime example of this, where they don't consider themselves manufacturers. Many of them don't consider themselves entrepreneurs. I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm just a guy in a studio that creates tables and makes a bunch of them and sells them on order. You are both a manufacturer, an entrepreneur, and an artist all at the same time. And so the last thing I would say is getting the community to embrace that manufacturing is not a dirty word in terms of economic development. This is something that a community can take huge amounts of pride in, that there's competitive advantage to marketing a community for those who may not be there now or maybe in your community and not doing it, to let them know that we have the resources that are available, many, not just New Bedford, the folks on this panel, many other cities, the resources are there, the tools are there, sort of the toolbox is ready for you. And there are great opportunities for growth and local wealth creation. So I think maybe different flavor in different parts of the country, but I think you're going to see a lot of overlap there. And I'm encouraged to hear that overlap from our perspective.
And Derek, what you said, that really was a good example of the business owner making the tables and not really looking at themselves as an entrepreneur or a manufacturer. And so that's some of the things that we have to work with our business owners with, to make sure that their business is legalized and legitimized, right? And make sure that they have the things in place, like their financials and their back office in place, so they can take advantage of those resources that are out there in the community.
I think that's a great point that Derek made, and Misty as well. I think that there's often an identity crisis amongst small scale manufacturers, and they don't necessarily understand their impact. And so one of the things that we did to try to help that was coalesce them and create some branding and help them with their outreach into the community. And so that ultimately they identified with what was going on, but also help the community in attraction and in their products and growth. And it really certainly ultimately had a great impact.
I want to go back to a theme that's been circulating among all three of you, which is that existing tradition in manufacturing. And you all touched a little bit upon what that might look like in terms of arts and culture manufacturers and micro entrepreneurs. But could you say a little bit for practitioners in the audience, if they're looking for that manufacturing tradition, what are the signs that you would look for? Like, that's a part of your history book in your, Wikipedia entry of Duluth or New Bedford, et cetera. But what are the signs that is something that can be utilized for future development and growth, or something that can be built on as an identity?
I think that you start to see it come to the surface, and you can, basically use that energy that's happening, because it is happening, and ultimately being able to identify it. And that sort of, I think Misty touched on it really well, is creating a path. So you've got the example, you've got some positive examples in your community that are happening. And if you've got business-minded community members who are willing to sort of step into the gap and become either mentors or supporters, they actually are they facilitate that process. They are identifying other people that have interest or are doing the work, and they bring them in. And then it's really, like Misty pointed out, the access to technical assistance, and then ultimately access to capital. And those two things go together. And if you have one or the other, it's really a difficult path. And so it's important to have both.
Yeah, can I add on to that, real quick? So small scale manufacturers, if you have 5, 10, 15 people working for you, right? The people that run those shops, those people are super busy. They're almost all, every time we run into these folks, they're sort of in a working foreman type of role. And every community sort of can identify those 2, 3, or 4 or more places, but there's usually a handful that are easily identifiable that everybody in the community or the region knows that's the thing. But they may be making a thing that's not super sexy, right? So I know later on you guys are going to ask me about some, offshore wind and other stuff, but we have a local company, Ketchum Supply. They've been in business since 1975. They're the industry standard for lobster traps, right? Not a sexy thing. Lobster, for dinner, that has an appeal. The lobster trap, not so much. And their story is so interesting in how that went from the dad's business to the daughter's. Her history is in life sciences, in bio, and how her shift is keeping that traditional, but adding on manufacturing components for aquaculture, sustained fisheries equipment. And I can only imagine what those dinner conversations were like one generation to the next and how this is going to transition. But we have to do a better job of telling that story her name's Heather, for Heather, because, she's so busy making this stuff that's not on her top of her call sheet, right? So what we're recognizing is there's a lot of those stories in New Bedford, and we need to do a better job telling them to make it not just better for those companies, but for other connections from one company to the next, that there may be some great synergies. And also for other companies either in that industry or in the geographic region who are saying, oh my God, if they're allowed to do that stuff there, this might be a good spot for us for a second location, expansion, whatever it might be. But you've got to sort of do some of the work, because these folks are really busy making the things that's making them successful.
Derek is exactly right. And what we did is we had very early morning meetings so that people could come in, do the networking, and we got them back to the job or on the job, before 8 o'clock in the morning. And that seemed to work really well. We had great attendance. We'd often have 40 to 50 people show up for those meetings, business owners, people who are interested in business, and real estate people. It was a great mix of people coming in to have the conversation early in the morning and having to respect those busy lives that entrepreneurs have, for sure.
And I totally agree with both of you. Some of the things that we do here in Akron, so we put together different events. So we have a procurement event that we put together for our different companies to come and find opportunities, or business to business networking, so they can do business with other businesses. And another thing that we did as part of the collaboration and partnerships, we begin to highlight our businesses in our community, whether it be through success stories, video clippings, interviews, different things of that nature, and then share amongst our partners, so that it's not just on our website or our platforms, it's shared amongst our ecosystem. And that way we get that word out there about the different small or medium-sized businesses that are doing great business in our city.
Yeah, can I just pop in for a sec for UMA? I think we also, for all the people on the call, if you're out and about in your city, some of the first signs of businesses are in pop-ups, or businesses usually each of them is trying to solve a certain problem. And it could be a gap in the market or a larger problem. So I think it's always interesting when you think about the culture of your place or the industry or the how things are shifting, like what new problems are being created in your city, and what are the opportunities to solve those. And you usually find an entrepreneur, and a lot of times a product entrepreneur, that's in that space that's figuring out a solution. And I think so part of it for us is also just talking about, yes, you are a manufacturer, you can connect to other manufacturers. Yes, you can start in a commercial kitchen, but there's a contract manufacturer that can help you grow. Having us really just support this solution, this product-based solution, and then linking to resources to help them continue on their pathway to growth, and also respecting them, figuring out what that pathway looks like for them. Are they growing this business to be acquired later? Do they want to keep it a family business? Do they want to, does their child who is going to take over the business have a different view? Like, I think that lobster trap example is really great, Derek. And I actually think lobster traps are really interesting, right? Like I think they're kind of sexy, but I am in manufacturing. So I just wanted to say that for those of you on the call, maybe afterward, just think about like, what are the 5 new products that you've seen pop up in your area, and are they solving a problem? And do you feel like those folks are connected to your ecosystem of support? And if not, maybe that's the first step.
I'm hearing some recurring themes about visibility of these businesses that may be hidden in the woodwork, and the importance of being the intermediaries to ask the questions, right? Of why they are important, of who is there, of the value that they bring. I'm also hearing some thoughts around just the perception of manufacturing, and not only branding the individual businesses, but also thinking about the weight that that term may carry within your specific places. Can we talk about that for a minute? Each of you have spoken to rebranding manufacturing and speaking to the new appeal of manufacturing as it has evolved. What is the appeal? How can we rebrand it, whether it's for the retail audience, like in the Lincoln Park commercial district, Lars, or whether it is, bringing manufacturing into the 21st century in terms of modern technology in New Bedford.
So when we engaged with the few manufacturers that were there and really ultimately the core of the ecosystem, they identified that they were meeting the needs of localization, and what they wanted to do, a need for them going forward, was keeping their authenticity. They really wanted to, they actually would use descriptors like gritty or authentic and real, and they did that, and that became part of the attraction when other manufacturers sort of came into the area. They met those criteria, and we were fortunate that they did. But by establishing that sort of what we want, that was ultimately important to what manifested. And I think so. Early stage, find out what the needs and wants are of who's there or who you're trying to attract, and ultimately, that's the yield that happens.
Thinking about your audience and starting with the audience that you have to expand on it. Any other thoughts to that question of manufacturing and its appeal?
Yeah, so and I don't think New Bedford, in terms of gateway cities, is alone in having in Massachusetts anyway, right? So we have a lower than state average educational attainment levels as they would traditionally be defined, right? Because when you grow up in a community where you can always go work in the mill, you can always go have a great job in construction or another manufacturer, you can always have a job in the fishing industry. Those paths are easier, and and even when I was in high school, that's a one job a family can thrive off of that. And that happens, right? So as that begins to decline and the economy changes, New Bedford, and we've read, I don't know how many white papers on gateway cities over the past 20 years, right? Where there's this desire to hold on to the past, right? And desperately, we just want the way things were in 1965, even though the world is constantly changing. So, but one thing that manufacturing does is the notion of, well, where's your community at right now, right? Not where you want it to be 15 years from now. You always want to get there. You always want folks to have better educational experiences, regardless of what those are, college or other programming, whatever that might be. But where are you at now? So for us, and not being ashamed about this, right? But it's a blue collar community. And when you have a tradition of those type of jobs, particularly in families, right? There are opportunities that might not be on a traditional high school, bachelor degree, maybe master's or more, and that's the only opportunity for job creation. There are others, and those others can be incredibly successful. Those folks can have a much higher degree of independence, which I know in my community is highly valued, right? and financially successful. Some of the most successful folks that are on my board are still in manufacturing very, very traditional ways, right? So not being afraid that you may be from a community that it does not have high degrees of bachelor's and master's degree, right? How can you use that to your advantage in other ways that are still incredibly fulfilling careers in making things that that person, that company, and that community can be proud of. So it took a long time for New Bedford, and we're just doing it now to sort of lean into that. It was mentioned gritty, right? But however you want to, whatever descriptor you want to use, but leading into those strengths as they exist, there can be some very good competitive advantage that comes out of that.
I think Derek touches on something that's really important, and that barrier to entry in a small scale manufacturing opportunity or creator. The capital intensity is relatively low, and typically people come into that sort of role with a passion and an expertise, and they can start them, building their enterprise, and with technical assistance, again, and access to capital, again, those things can happen. And I think those are, if you kind of fertilize the ecosystem, things start to happen, and there's just a ton of passion out there, and I think that is what drives small scale manufacturers. And if we give them the opportunity, it'll happen.
And so for us, one of the things we do, we have a program in Ohio called the Ohio Manufacturing Extension Partnership Program. And a component of that program is pairing high school students up with local manufacturers. And they are using them in internship roles and getting them for those individuals, those students who are interested in manufacturing, they can actually get a local internship with a local manufacturing firm to help them understand and know the business and to continue to thrive that business industry in our area. So we are introducing it into our high schools for our young people to begin to have a knowledge of manufacturing and to see if that's something that they would like to go into. So that's one of the ways that we continue to try to help bring that appeal to the manufacturing industry.
Well, I'm hearing so many shared themes here about the loss of status that's linked to manufacturing in your cities, and the way that you're taking that identity and projecting a path forward into a future, whether it's for the youth or it's for future jobs and what good jobs look like. So thank you all for sharing. I'd like to pivot us a little bit to the paper and some of the discussion around strategies for racial equity and sustainability. I think we're trying to bring together these kind of overarching interests of smaller legacy cities, and in some ways manufacturing came first and then the racial equity kind of intersected, or in other places it was sustainability that was an overarching interest, and there was an overlap with manufacturing. But I'm curious, where are those efforts intersecting in your places, and what does it look like? And maybe since we haven't talked about offshore wind yet, and I feel like we would be remiss if we didn't. Derek, we could start with you in New Bedford.
Sure. So industrial scale offshore wind, the manufacturing part, at least right now in the United States, this might be different in 5, 10, 12 years, is happening in Europe and in other countries, right? There's really big windmills, and the components, they're called foundations, towers, nacelles, and blades. They're not going to fit in whatever Major League Baseball park happens to be in your community. They are quite big. We're very excited about, of course, the job creation that comes with that. Super excited about the ability to produce power from renewable source, the wind. That's all great. And as anyone might imagine, you're inventing a new industry in the United States. We have hundreds and hundreds of fishing vessels coming in and out of the port every day. Guess what? There's conflict, right? I'll spare everyone all the details and drama about what that is, but it is everything that you can imagine. How can these two things compete in some spaces, in some areas, for the same bulkhead at the port, for the same lanes of travel, as it were, coming in, and of course in fishing grounds and other places. You're going to put immovable objects in the ocean. It creates this conflict, and all these things, will need to be, will need to be worked out. Believe me when I tell you, there's no one who wants when you're talking about sustainability, a sustainable fishery more than fishermen, right? They want to make sure that they can continue to fish. It's the most heavily regulated industry in the country. They can only go to work in some cases 60 days a year. So there's a constant, and they are huge believers, by the way, in science as a way of making sure that those stocks are healthy and good in good shape. So things are, in balance, as it were. So there's a lot to be negotiated there, and you have sustainable energy, a sustainable food source, all of that's being managed. And honestly, anybody that tells you they have the answers to that in a port city that's starting offshore wind is totally blowing smoke. It's going to take the first large-scale project, Vineyard Wind, which will deploy from New Bedford. By the way, these projects are measured in the billions, right? 2.3 billion, I think, is the first project. It'll probably take the first, and I feel the second project to really know how all these things are going to work out, right? We'll probably deploy anywhere between 15 and 20 projects from New Bedford over the next 20 to 30 years, just because the infrastructure that's required is so massive. So they'll work all those things out, but sustainability is going to be a big part of both of their goals, right? And I can tell you the thing that will make them align better is when they can figure out how to do that in a way that doesn't hurt and may even enhance their profitability. That's where all those things will mesh together. In terms of DEI and inclusion, and that's a huge struggle because we want that to happen. The thing that finally has sort of connected with these larger, basically mostly European developers that may have local partners here, is working with trusted local partners that are known in the community. They have constituencies of their own, right? And I'm not going to believe somebody from Denmark, let's say, for offshore wind, but are you working with, Buddy Andrade in my community who knows what's what, right? And that is getting better, but I'm going to be honest, it's not super smooth. I think that will get smoother and smoother as things come up, because in regards to offshore wind is a totally new industry in the country. There's managing expectations is the most difficult thing that we're doing in terms of the number of jobs, when they're going to happen, so there's a lot of that's happening, and you got to get into it. I'm sure these guys, everybody's going to, whatever the sector might be, you've got to start doing it and know what's what. But you can't do, you have to have trusted community partners, specifically when it comes to making sure that either, whatever constituency has been left behind in the past, we are not in a dissimilar position as Misty was describing before. Whole groups of folks, we're not part of this. We do a ton of that in our work to make sure that we're reaching those folks. And if those folks say, look, I'm aware of this small business program, I'm aware of this offshore wind job opportunity, I'm well aware of it, I'm choosing not to participate, that's great. What we're still struggling with in making big strides, but not nearly perfect yet, is making sure that all of those different neighborhoods, all those different groups of folks are aware of the opportunities that exist, are aware of the resources and programs that exist. And again, Misty said this before, and then promoting that and telling those stories over and over again, because it's one thing to hear it from the EDC or one of our partners. It's a different thing when you run into a friend, neighbor, or someone, a family member, a second cousin who says, hey, I've just hooked up with Vineyard Wind for this, and apprenticeship program, and this is a great opportunity. That has a lot more credibility. So, we're doing that. And by the way, that work is incredibly inefficient, just so folks know, and it's not easy, but it must be done, and you got to do it every day, and you got to do it with a lot of partners. So for us, that's the biggest thing, particularly through the lens of through industrial scale offshore wind.
I think for Duluth, there was a discovery process. We had this great success story in one of our neighborhoods, and craft manufacturing getting lots of positive attention in our community and region and state. And what we realized was that all of the participants were pretty white, honestly. And so we learned through that discovery that we needed to find out why BIPOC members of our community were not participating, and through the realization of why not, and there wasn't a path, there wasn't technical assistance, culturally appropriate, there wasn't access to capital, there were all sorts of missing pieces to making that happen in our community. And so if we think about economic development, typically we think about attraction or retention. I think there's a third word, and I think we need to think about inclusion. We have people in our communities that are not being able to participate in our economy, and that is wrong. And so we started to work on it. And one of the first things we did is we partnered with the University of Minnesota Duluth Cultural Entrepreneur Program. We utilized a curriculum that was developed in New Mexico, Creative Startups. We had a 22 participant cohort, 40% BIPOC, 40% women. And of the 22, within 6 months, we had 15 generating revenue. What we learned at the end of that cohort is we didn't have access to capital in our community for BIPOC entrepreneurs. And so we haven't solved that yet, but ultimately we're either going to develop a local CDFI to create that access, or we're going to partner with a CDFI in the region or state to help us ensure that capital access exists for BIPOC members of our community. And really, ultimately, it's wealth generation. We've had some foundational support, and we've got this incredible working group, and it's starting to happen. And we're at early stage for a BIPOC incubator in our community, which will ultimately be an anchor in our downtown that has a lot of empty storefronts. So that process is we're working on it. We needed it to happen in a desperate way, and it's happening.
And for Akron, our leaders in our city government, they did had an independent economic development study done of our city. And through the Brookings report, it was found out that Black businesses were intentionally left out of economic development. And so from that point, Elevate Akron came to life, and it is a strategic plan to be very inclusive in our city, to include all businesses in the economic development growth, right? And so as partners in the ecosystem, we began to have strategic meetings on how can we serve our Black and minority populations, and so that they are receiving the services that they need, as well as it's done inclusively and equitably. And so we have come up with some resources and programmings that target specifically our Black or minority owned businesses. So we have a program called Thrive, which helps our Black and minority owned businesses navigate through the entrepreneur system, right? And it helps them. It is partners with ourselves, the Minority Business Assistance Center, the City of Akron, Bounce Innovation Hub, and Western Reserve Community Fund, which is a CDFI. And so we provide technical assistance, professional assistance, access to capital, certifications, and things of that nature to help our businesses be successful. And so one of the things that's very important to know is that there are resources out there, but we have to connect the people to the resources. And so that's one of the things that we are definitely boots on the grounds doing with all of our partners, making sure that we get out here and touch that population that was left out, and making sure that we help them navigate through the system so they can become sustainable and grow in doing business.
Thanks, Misty. And I'm so struck by the the different tensions that the themes bring up within each of your cities. And Akron, by your unique position that you came to be in terms of having done this work around creating a system that's already turned towards racial equity, and then having that foundation to bring folks into manufacturing opportunities because you're already on the same page with each other about what Black businesses need, and then seeing sort of the the flip side of that, trying to build a bridge to communities of color in places like New Bedford and Duluth, which presents its own challenges, right? Not only building that bridge, but also going back to what's the product that you have, and maybe it's not appropriate for communities of color. And having to move through the conversations around trust and who's driving the conversation there. And then I want to bring us back to that conversation about sustainability too that Derek brought to the forefront, which is kind of big S, little s. There's a statewide and also national goals that we're setting around sustainability and climate change, and there's also impacts that has on local industries that are integrated with ideas of geographic sustainability of our ports, uses of our natural resources, and a natural appreciation for that is really built into your places because that's part of your heritage and your history. And there's that tension around the success of those industries and the sort of top down. I don't know if that's a great word, but that's the one that I'm coming to, the top-down kind of directives around sustainability goals. So all those things I'm hearing you work through in your local places. So we have a few minutes left, and I feel like we've had a pretty wide-ranging conversation, but I want to bring it back to our audience. I once worked with an advocate that said there are no best practices because every place is different. There's only lessons learned, right? And so we've shared a little bit about lessons learned in each of your places, but with the audience in mind, would you speak a little bit more to your learnings, and also for those who are looking to get started, what are the first steps that you would encourage them to take based on your lessons?
I think I would say locate your resources in your community. I think when we start off, that's one of the things that we don't do. Sometimes we just start and we get to doing business, but if you locate the resources, especially those entrepreneur service providers that work with businesses, all businesses, including manufacturers, I think they can help you navigate through the system some, because of some things that they already know that it can help you while you're doing business or you're starting to do business. So one of the things, I think, locate the entrepreneur service providers that's in your community and the resources that they have to offer.
I've got to echo that because if you don't, so if you're in a role of like one of the panelists, right, the EDC, we're providing services to those businesses. You better make sure you've got your house in order before you start trying to help somebody else, right? This is sort of put your oxygen mask on first before you help your passenger on the plane. So that is, and there are all kinds of resources out there. So, we made sure that we had applied to the SBA nationally. We had, worked with our state partners, applied for local ARPA funds, convinced local officials that this was a need worth investing in. Make sure all of our partners are on board. You know what it's like trying to coordinate with 7 different technical resource partners directly, not to mention 35 others in a broader, framework. Understand what that's going to take just for organizational logistics. You've got to have all your stuff squared away, including, does the submittable application work right? All those type of things. Make sure you're ready to help, right? Because there's nothing worse than saying we want to help, and then someone says, I need your help, but you're not teed up to do that yet. So take the time to plan and prepare well, and then once you think you're ready to help and you start, be ready to retool and tweak, because I can assure you, if there are going to be 5-6% that didn't work at all, 5% that needs to be adjusted a little bit. So you're gonna have to allow for that, but be prepared to be a good resource. Be deliberate.
I'm going to echo both Derek and Misty. It's resources identifying, it's identifying partners. There's a bit of a discovery process, because as you begin, you'll understand that there are gaps, and then having to find solutions for those gaps ultimately is really important. And so when you start the process, or if you're in the midst of the process, it's those partnerships, it's resources, whether it's from the city, foundations, potentially large employers in the community who want to see their community grow. They have corporate responsibility. Reach out, and they're there. And like Derek pointed out, there will be gaps. You'll have discovery, but then it's really just finding solutions, and it's all a path that you have to start, and then ultimately, hopefully, success.
Well, I'm struck by the unanimity of the panelists today on that question, and also by the way that your theme echoes some of the philosophies of community development, which is to take the long-term view, to understand your local community and the assets that are there, and to treat that community as an ecosystem, right? As a set constellation of actors and resources and histories, and to make connections between all of them, and to use that as your foundation for change. Wonderful. Well, I want to turn it over to our Q&A moderator in waiting, Katie Stanton. I know that there's a whole slew of questions for us. What would you like to tee up first?
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, and please stay on to answer from your perspective too, as the author of the awesome report that we put out. So I'm going to combine some of these questions. The first is, how is the Biden administration's more, and I love this phrase, muscular industrial policy with the CHIPS Act, IRA, ARPA, filtering down to your cities? I think some of you touched a little bit on that already, and then kind of a sub question, if you're able to share. There was a question about how much of that funding, like how much funding you got through any or all of those things that your city or region is able to work with. So we'll start there.
I guess I'll start on this one. So we just had a meeting yesterday with a private sector company who is really digging into the CHIPS Act and getting ready to make a proposal. New Bedford's about 55 miles south of Boston, for anybody that doesn't know that, in Massachusetts. And while Boston's going to be their home base, they sort of have this sort of 60-mile radius. And we had a very first meeting to understand for their physical presence, they want located in New Bedford, but their main partners in Cambridge and MIT, there's obviously a value there. So for the CHIPS Act, a lot of it is, we don't know yet. There's a ton of stuff in that legislation, by the way, that we're super interested in. And there's a big difference between two sentences in legislation and how that turns into a program. So some of that stuff is, be careful in terms of, federal funding. My director of creative strategies asked me the other day, how do I ask for this additional funding from the state? And my response was, shamelessly. You ask shamelessly. So whether it's the SBA or our state partners or our local mayor and city council with their allocations, we put together robust programs because we knew the need. We were not, so I think in total, probably $6 million in year one between federal, state, and local money, one way or another through ARPA, let's say. And I know that probably by August, September, we're going to be going back and demonstrating pipeline need. That's going to show that we're going to need to double that, right? And the interesting question that's going to come up is, we've sort of hit a nerve on some of this stuff, and we've been talking about it today. How do you sustain that level of support is needed to jumpstart that local wealth creation? But we could not, I will say this, we couldn't do any of the things we're doing at anywhere near the scale without those programs, right? Because we've operated grant programs, lending programs, all that stuff through our shop, not nearly at the scale that we're able to do to jumpstart a small business and particularly entrepreneurial work. So that's been critical for us.
Thank you, Derek. Lars or Misty, do you have anything to add to the question about how you guys are utilizing the money that might be flowing or is flowing down from the administration?
And very similar to Derek, it's going into programming, also into opportunities for access to capital, whether it be grants or loans. So our CDFIs receive some funding. MBAC is funded through the state of Ohio. The city of Akron has put in funding. And we also, from a proposal that we did to work with Black businesses, that we were in the Bloomberg Mayor's Challenge, and we didn't win that, but anonymous private donor did connect with us. And so now we also have private funding to pour into our entrepreneur space. And so I can tell you it's well over $4 million, the funding that has poured into our city within the last year or two. And so we are able to do a lot more work, but we're also able to build capacity within our organizations that serve entrepreneurs. That was very important as well, because within our center, we were fully staffed, but not at capacity to service the individuals that needed service in our area. And so some of these dollars have allowed us to hire an additional business advisor, a certification specialist, a financial advisor that could work with the business owners, and they specialize in those areas. And so that has been a tremendous help for our city and for our entrepreneur service providers and our programs.
And we have a great working relationship with the city of Duluth, and essentially our role has been to help establish the pipeline and help them with determination. And we've had some great projects funded through the ARPA fund.
And can I just add something for those on the call, particularly with a program called SSBCI? It's still pretty new. Treasury, I think, just finished allocations to states, and the way that that works is it's money from two small businesses coming through the states and then dispersed across the state to various cities. For those of you who this may be a new term, I would strongly encourage you to look at your state's application. You can or find it online, or the person who applied and received the funds from the state, and really take a look at it and see how your organization or your manufacturing strategies fit in with some of the goals in the plan, essentially. This is the other point I want to make is, like, these are long-term investments. So it's unlike some funds, which are just 1 year, SSBCI is going to be rolled out over 10 years. And so there's a little bit of time. So I don't want anyone to feel like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to do this. I think the important point is figure out what you want and what you need, to Lars's point. And then to Derek's point, make a case. And then likely there's a funding out there and a partner out there. But don't overlook those funds, because it's the largest federal investment in manufacturing and in small business, for that matter, that we've seen in a really, really long time.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, I feel like we're just at the front end of the leading edge of the learning curve, all of the different metaphors at once. But Derek, to your point at the beginning, we don't know what implementation for a lot of this is going to look like. So it's going to take communication, collaboration between places, just like what we're doing here today. So hopefully we'll be able to convene additional conversations. I want to turn to another question. This is, I think, a great one, particularly through Lincoln's lens of smaller legacy cities. Daniel asks, how do you retain the authenticity of a city when you begin to economically develop? Do you see a stigma against blue collar work and changes in a growing economy? And if so, how can you work to maintain respect for those historical industries while inviting the newer, maybe creative class, or the more innovative businesses, although we know all manufacturing is innovative regardless of its age. So I'll put that to the panelists now.
In Duluth, what we did is actually the Duluth Seaway Port Authority developed a working paper with ICIC out of Boston based on the fact that we had a real challenge in our community with manufacturing not being that well regarded. And so they came out, developed the background, showed that the compensation for manufacturing jobs was quite good, and that the contribution of manufacturers to our community from a ripple effect, from a property tax paid, from a multitude of different aspects, how important they were, and ultimately the impact compared to sectors like education and healthcare. They were profoundly impactful, and that really, I think, turned the corner in our community on how manufacturing was perceived.
Yeah, so how so one of the so there's a term that gets thrown around in Bedford the past 3 or 4 years, and I'm laughing because there's the real definition and then there's the oh my God, right? So one gallery opens up and it's like, oh my God, this entire block is going to be gentrified like tomorrow, so no, things don't happen that fast, and there's actual real and terrible ways that that's actually forced through zoning and other decisions of where transportation, that there's if you're planning an architecture background, there's but there's a fear of that, right? And that's, I think, so the first thing is never dismiss legitimate fears, even if data is showing something else, right? That's thing one. Thing two, and we do this, we don't care what it is, right? We want to know what the actual data is, right? So Lars just talked about, here's what the pay is. Here's how you can, combat that type of stuff. So we're big believers in having a lot of great data. We're about to launch, by the way, an economic development study on the economic impact of the creative enterprises specifically as a sector, right? And that's going to take, 4 months of, work and funding, to get to exactly what Lars is talking about. But that's just one example. Always have the good data to help so you can defend and make your case, whether it's locally or statewide or otherwise. And once you have that and have all that sort of, all those white papers stacked up, find really good videographers, find folks in those industries that are super photogenic, right? We have this great Cape Verdean guy in town who started his own excavation and construction business. He's like the most handsome 32-year-old guy you've ever seen. So yeah, so that's the guy that and had to convince him, couldn't even get him to clean off his boots, when the photographer was going to come. And the reason we do both is if you don't have the actual information and it's all I think, people think lots of things. You really have to have the background of what that is. And then you have to have the real faces that people can connect with. And then you have to do it over and over again. So my neighbors and fellow citizens know that our strategy is to grow from the inside out. We're not looking to sort of replace anybody. We want, neighborhoods that are okay to become great. We want neighborhoods that may be shaky to be stabilized. And we want all the businesses that are here to grow from the inside out. And manufacturing is one sector where that plays a key part. But it is the one more than any that traditionally sort of gets downplayed the most. So we're seeking out those folks and matching up data with great local promotion, particularly with folks who are, there's always these folks, right? They're known about town, maybe just a little bit more than someone else. Start with those folks, sort of everything's okay. No one's trying to, we're trying to grow from within. If someone wants to come and visit and move to New Bedford and buy a great big old Whaling era house, we love that too. No one's being excluded. But we're focused on almost exclusively of growing from within. And then whoever comes into that mix, that's fantastic.
Yeah, so it's really about sort of qualitative, quantitative storytelling and making sure that one group, whether it's blue collar or these more, say, innovative new businesses, they're not sacrificing one for the other, but it's making sure that there's room for both. And I would say that's like both the policy focus, but also once you're like doing programming. Thank you both. Misty, I want to turn to you with a question. We have someone who would love to hear more about the procurement event that you run, particularly which communities are invited to attend, and are the buyer side, are they institutional buyers, local stores? What's kind of the makeup there?
And so we do several procurement events throughout the year. So our big one will include everyone, the institutional buyers, the local stores, it'll include everyone. But then we also have different events where we break it down to it may focus on a specific sector. And so that way we can make those connections more intimate and peer up the business to business. So we have done it several ways, and we have about 4 of them throughout the year, 1 a quarter. And along with that, we also connect the businesses via email, phone, that way to opportunities as well. But our procurement events are done with a wide approach first, right? And everyone's invited, and then we'll do 3 more in the other quarters that it's more sector specific.
Great, thank you. Perhaps there's a way that folks can learn more too about it. I don't know if you have a website for those events. You can feel free to put it in the Q&A and I can share it, or we can do it later in a follow-up email. But I think that's a question on a lot of, I think, at least UMA's network members' minds is, how do we connect these small scale makers and manufacturers to larger opportunities with local anchor institutions or even bigger stores, so that they can have bigger orders, therefore making them more sustainable. So I know the procurement question is one that rings for a lot of communities.
And I'll put our website in the question and answer.
Thank you, Misty. Derek and Lars, you both kind of mentioned data in the previous question, and again, this question is for all 3 of you, or Sarah and Audra too, but can any of you share more about how you are tracking sort of the outcomes of your programs? I know a lot of us on the call are nonprofits, and government also has to track their outcomes. And I think that's always a big question around how are we telling the story, but also then to your point earlier, Derek and Lars, how we do that quantitatively. So how are you tracking performance measures and outcomes in your programs?
So for us in New Bedford, that's fairly easy, because the SBA and HUD require it to almost an annoying level of detail, right? And we actually spend quite a bit of time with that. I don't know what they do with that information when they get it. I hope the work that is required to do that, and actually that we have to put on applicants to make sure they're giving us information, that it's being put to good uses at those levels. I'm sure that it is. But I can tell you what we do with that information locally, right? So you have to track all this data from either federal, state, or local entities who are either granting whatever the mechanism might be. For us, there's not one source of funds that we get where we don't have to track that data and those outcomes, including for the SBA through a program called Community Navigator, identifying success stories like sort of every quarter and experiences with each of your resource partners, right? So, so we take the have to, that's great. And then we internally decide, okay, then what do we want to do with that? So we use that information in like our quarterly e-blast newsletter, or, when there's a particular success story. We just did one, that's really compelling because of the neighborhood that was in, and we use that. We have found that the data that they want us to track in terms of, your population characteristics are beating in the most recent census. That was, I just think, 1 or 2 years ago. So our programs are reaching a level of diversity that beats the metrics of our own community, right? That's fantastic. We think that's because of our partners, but we don't really know, we think, right? So we have to wait for another quarter or two to find that out. So for us, we always take sort of the multiple points that we have to track and do. We never, one important thing I have to tell everybody who, if you're new to going to a program, never skip what you have to do, right? There's far more pain in trying to skip something and saying we don't have time to do it than doing it. But then take the effort to find out where are the nuggets that are important for us to help us tell the story and make these programs more successful. That's the bottom line. Are there nuggets or trends that you see in the data that you have to report that you can say, hey, this is showing something important. It's not a spike that we have to hit on and work to improve, or we have success here. This is what we try to do is, where does it look like some margin of success that the data is showing over multiple quarters? How do we drive on that and become even more successful? And that's how we use that. And we've been doing this for 15, 17 years, just myself. I'm here at the EDC. And so we've sort of, gotten over the complaining and starting using it as a tool to be effective.
Well, it's a very mature approach, Derek. Lars, I see you came up.
Yeah, so we're part of a national organization, and we have a great group within our enterprise called Knowledge Management. And so they came in basically and did the analysis of what was happening. And, we didn't, as we started the work, it was really so grassroots that we didn't really think about capturing data. And so we didn't ultimately do that until we were probably 2 or 3 years in. But, some of the key numbers were we had 35 new businesses and over 300 new jobs in a relatively smaller, area. And so it was profound. But we ultimately had to rely on our experts in our organization to come in and help us disseminate that.
Yeah, I'm hearing the theme of partnerships. Misty, go ahead.
And for us, in our city, our data was collected in silos. Each organization was collecting their own data. So we use Salesforce, a database, and we have KPIs that's driven by the state of what we should reach, right? And so through this collaboration and partnership, we began to share some of that data and collect it as a city. Right. So that way we can get a true picture of who we're serving and how that data can show us where we need to improve on and how we can make a bigger impact for those that we are serving. And so before, when that data was collected in silos, it's hard to see the bigger picture for the city as a whole. We can see the picture for us as an organization, but not as a city. And so now through our collaborations and partnership, that data is being collected as a group. And now we can see a true picture from the city's perspective of what we're doing and the impact that we're making on the businesses that we serve.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the common thread there again is that partnership and unsiloing the data so that you can have a true picture and that you can reach more communities through those partnerships. I'm actually going to turn it back over to Sarah and Audra. We're almost at time, and I just want to say thanks to the audience for all your great questions. And I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them, but anything we want to do here at the end, Sarah or Audra?
I think this may be a quick round of closing thoughts from all the practitioners. First of all, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. It's been such a pleasure to get to know each of your cities and the work that you are doing. And also a plug for the full report, which has been placed in the chat. There's so much more to unpack behind Duluth, New Bedford, and Akron. And I encourage you to read the newly designed report to get into each of those places. So with that, could we go around to the room and just do a round robin of any parting thoughts, recommendations, or words of encouragement for our audience today? Misty, let's start with you.
I'm going to repeat what I said before for the audience. Make sure that you utilize the resources that you have in your community. And then for us as the entrepreneur service providers, we have to work together so we can see where the gaps are and we can eliminate those gaps by doing business and collaborating together.
Thank you. Lars, what about you?
I think, just reiterating what Misty's saying, and the resources, the partnerships, the opportunities, asking questions, engaging with the people in your community that are part of the ecosystem, and helping them, asking them what their needs and wants are, and then working on that with them collaboratively. I think that's, I think we've heard that over and over again in our time together. So, yeah.
And last but not least, Derek.
Understand that small scale manufacturing is often a thing that's overlooked in larger economic development strategies, right? Don't beat yourself up or your community up if that's been done. Just accept it and move on. And I think the three things I would say that have worked well for us and what will as we go forward, right? So one, you have to be intentional, particularly in a space that's been overlooked. So you have to be focused on what you want to do. For us, it's always, are we doing things that are measurable, right? So that's really important. Much like the paper that's in the link. Don't be afraid to steal great ideas and experiences from other places. We are relentless stealers of great ideas from other places, and then adapt that recipe to your circumstances. We do that all the time here, shamelessly. Do that. And the last thing is, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the very good, right? So if there are 10 things you want to get to, but you can only get to 6 right now, do 6. 6 is more than 0. So it's always better to start, know that there's going to be, room for growth, and then, take it from there. I mean, in this space, that's getting started, I think, is the most important thing.
And then finally, Audra is our resident manufacturing expert. If you could close us out.
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone for being here. I hope that everyone was very inspired and really believes that manufacturing is a strategy for economic mobility and growth. I think we talked a lot about today about the opportunities, and I just wanted to say for all those here as attendees that your own place has its own unique culture. Its physicality is also unique, and really just take a look at the assets, the history, have an expansive view of manufacturing, all from your artisans all the way through your large manufacturers, and experiment and see what can work. And if you're curious about this topic, or you want to dive deeper into another element of how manufacturing can be this strategy, please feel free to connect with UMA. We've got a sign up in the chat. But we really want to continue this conversation. We want to thank, I just thank Lars and Misty and Derek and Sarah and the folks at Lincoln for bringing us all together today and raising this up. And I just continue doing really great work, and we'll continue sharing it as best as we can. Thank you. Back to you, Sarah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. Thanks one more time to our amazing panelists and hosts for creating the space for the conversation. I understand this is just the first launching pad of a longer conversation about small manufacturing in smaller legacy cities. So please make sure to sign up for those newsletters and stay tuned for more. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks all.
Thanks.
Thank you.